All right, Esther 9. And we are going to, like I said, we're going to finish up. We made it to the final chapter in the book of Esther. And it has been a journey. We have gone on a very long journey with Esther here. Last week we saw a lot of turning points, okay? And what the enemy meant for evil, God turned around and used for good is the theme for today. So today we're going to look at what comes after the deliverance, the celebration, the legacy, the bigger picture of the story through Esther, Mordecai, and even one final word from King Ahasuerus, our favorite guy in the story, right? All right, so chapter 9 and verse 20. And Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the province of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obliging them to keep the 14th day of the month of Adar, and also the 15th day of the same year by year, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days of sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Okay, so isn't it beautiful how Mordecai is the one who takes the time to write this all down? Okay, now he is second in command, but he takes the time to record all of these things. He knew that these moments needed to be remembered. They needed to live beyond himself. But these weren't just Mordecai's victories. They were a community-wide testament of what God was going to do for his people, of God's faithfulness to his people. So we see here the Feast of Purim, and it becomes one of the most joyful holidays in the Jewish calendar. It's like if we took the 4th of July and Christmas and Halloween and it had a baby. That is Purim. Kids dress up in bright, festive colors. They play music. They read the book of Esther. They give gifts to each other. They send food and gifts to the poor. They even rattle noisemakers every time Haman's name is mentioned, and they boo and hiss at his name every time it's mentioned as they read the entire book. But notice something deeper here. Mordecai makes sure that generosity is part of this celebration. They send food not only to one another, but they also send gifts to the poor in their regions. So even in the joy of victory, they're called to think outside of just their community and to reach out to others. So why do you think it's important that Mordecai made sure that this was a yearly remembrance for his people?
That was such a big, it was so big, it needed to be remembered.
But they have all been killed, and
he's celebrating their life.
Yeah,
saved them from.
They're surviving.
Yeah.
Just like with the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we try not to forget that.
Yeah. How easy is it for us to just forget?
Very.
Very easy.
One generation, we usually
Do they
forget
still
things.
celebrate this holiday?
They still today celebrate
and
Purim.
is it still in these dates?
Yep.
Oh, we should study the feasts.
With
So
representations of the food.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's I love that. Don't you realize that there's just Baptists because they're like, we have to have food. There has to be food involved.
Well, and I've been to, my grandparents are Jewish, so I've been to several Jewish events. Their food is so good.
Food is
So
an
good.
integral part of
It
this.
really is.
Absolutely.
And they
integral
call
part
it
of
a
this.
French toast girl.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
All right, so Mordecai realized how important this was. So let's continue on and find out what happens the rest of the story. So the Jews accepted what they had started to do and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast that is, cast lots, to crush and to destroy them. But when it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should be returned on their own head, that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they call these days Purim, after the term pur. Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter, and of what they had faced in this matter, and of what had happened to them, the Jews finally obligated themselves and their offspring firmly obligated themselves and their offspring, and all who joined them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written, and at the time appointed every year, that these days should be remembered and kept through every generation, in every clan, province, and city, and that these days of Purim should never fall into disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among the descendants. Okay, so in these verses, the people agree with Mordecai. They agree with this decree that he has sent out to celebrate Purim annually, okay? So basically they made it an official recognized holiday for the Jews, okay? But did you catch something strange in that little section there? Esther's name is not even mentioned in that at all. It's downgraded to, and the king was made aware of what was going on, without even Esther being mentioned, okay? And it's strange because her name is the title of this very book, of this very letter, and yet it's not even mentioned in the official summary of the holiday. Isn't that ironic? That the one person who hinged on the king knowing all of this isn't even mentioned.
It wasn't about her.
It wasn't about her.
It was about the people.
Exactly. So even though she was the queen who risked everything to save her people, her name fades into the background because it wasn't about Esther. So this is a reminder that our legacy isn't about fame, it's about faithfulness. God's faithfulness to his people. And another layer of irony, if the Persian law had been able to be revoked, the king would have been able to spare 75,811 men who died those 2 days. How many soldiers, future soldiers, did the empire lose that day? Because sometimes human stubbornness and pride can have very real, painful consequences. All right, verse 29. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Habael, and Mordecai the Jew gave full written authority confirming this second letter about Purim. Letters were sent to all the Jews, to 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, in words of peace and truth, that these days of Purim should be observed at their appointed seasons, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther obligated them, and that they had obligated themselves and their offspring with regard to the feast in their lamenting. The command of Esther confirmed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing. So we see here Esther and Mordecai working together one final time to write this official document and have it sent out to celebrate Purim. And the letters are sent out far and wide, and did you catch that? We're told in peace, as opposed to the other edicts that went out with war, and now we have peace, okay? And the people gladly embrace this celebration, choosing to remember it, choosing that out of their sorrow, they would remember the joy that came afterward because of God's faithfulness. So if that's not enough, we now end with these words in chapter 10. King Ahasuerus imposed tax on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews, and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people, and spoke peace to his people. So the book of Esther ends with a tax. Why? Because King Ahasuerus not only lost to the Greeks, but he's just lost 75,811 men, his soldiers. So now he's got to rebuild his army. He's got to rebuild again to protect his 127 provinces. Okay? All of these men were lost on the altar of Haman's pride, of one man's pride. All of these men were lost.
But it doesn't say that they complained about their tax.
No, because, you really can't complain about a tax by the king.
Right, I mean, you could say, taxes, everybody needs
Yeah.
to pay their share.
So this was a special tax.
Right.
This was basically like a
Right.
one-time tax because I now have to restore everything that was taken.
And they probably knew that.
Yeah. But it's interesting that it's recorded here. And with these last few words, the focus shifts. Mordecai's second in command. He's remembered for seeking the good of his people and speaking peace. What a legacy. But again, we're not ended on Esther. We're ended on Mordecai and what he did for the people. We're told that all of these events are recorded in the official royal chronicles. Remember the chronicles that were read to the king to make him try to fall asleep? In those books of Media and Persia, okay? So this was real history that was recorded and written down by another empire outside of Israel. This isn't a folklore or a fairy tale. It's history that was recorded down. It's God's hand in real time, for real people, in real history, and we have the account here from Mordecai the Jew. So why do you think that Scripture tells us that this specific story was recorded in the Media and Persia history? Why is that significant to us, to them, to the Jews?
I can see why it would be significant to the Jews,
Okay.
but
Is
to
that-
the Medes and the Persians, why would it be significant to them? I mean, would they see that
Jewish
just because of one guy they lost, that would be like a training, teaching moment?
Mhm.
You know, keep your pride intact, you might lose 75,000 men.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so think about, remember, we have people who have converted to Judaism, who are still nationally Medes and Persians, but also as that generation unfolds and the Israelites are removed from Media and Persia, there's still that history of what happened among them. And a confirmation of a eyewitness testimony outside of the nation of Israel to confirm what had happened. So now we have two accounts of confirming the history and the story of it. So we can't just say that these people made it up.
One's biblical, one is
One's
not.
biblical and one's an outside source. That we can go to the Chronicles of the Medes and Persians and find the same exact story. Isn't that incredible?
Mhm.
Okay.
Absolutely
Yeah,
incredible
that's
that
incredible.
the Lord had it made to where he had Mordecai in place to make sure that it got in there. Because remember, his story got left out. His story was in there and he was not honored. And that was the story that God used to remind the king of what needed to be done. And so Mordecai was going to make sure that Purim was in there. Okay? Isn't that incredible that God put him right in that spot and confirmed for all of history, for every generation that now had that chronicle, that they could go back and read that. And that it wasn't just a Jewish fairy tale. This isn't just happily ever after. This is real life history that we can confirm outside of Israel and outside of the Bible. Okay? Alright, so now let's take a step back and admire the absolute beautiful structure of this story in some mirror moments. And if you don't think that they're incredible when you line them up. So remember the King's Feast in chapters 1 and 2. They're reflected here in Purim in chapters 8 and 9 and 10. Haman's rise in chapter 3 mirrors Mordecai's rise in chapter 8. We have Haman's deadly decree in chapter 3 reflects in Mordecai's saving decree in chapter 9. Even the planning scenes mirror each other. First, Mordecai urges Queen Esther in chapter 4, and then the pair are planning together in chapter 8. And of course, chapter 6, right in the middle of it all, is the sleepless night and the pivot point in the story. Okay? So let's reflect on some of the themes that we have seen unfold. God moved in supernatural and yet very natural ways. No Red Sea parting, no manna, no fingerprints that we can see, but he is there in every detail and every turn. Queen Vashti's fall, Esther's rise, Mordecai's position, even the timing of the edicts, none of it is a coincidence. Esther and Mordecai had unique access and favor, but they also had to choose to be faithful and respond, and those choices mattered deeply. This entire book is a master class on how free will and God's divine providence coexist, as evidenced by this exhaustive list that we have collected over this last few weeks. So I'm gonna have these be passed around. Okay? The biggest twist of all in the book of Esther is this. It is not a moral story. There's heavy drinking, there's lust, there's political scheming, revenge, murder, even the Jewish people intermarrying with each other with the Gentiles. Esther doesn't really read like a happily ever after. It's messy, it's complicated, it's human. Esther and Mordecai weren't perfect. Their world was not clean and neat, but their faith and courage, rooted in trust, allowed God to write a greater story through them. The Jews were preserved, and the Amalekites were finally defeated. And through it all, God never abandoned his promises. Through all the brokenness, God was at work, quiet, persistent, and faithful. Not once is his name mentioned, but not once is he absent. This is the heartbeat of Esther. A God who is sovereign even when he seems silent. A God who can redeem anything, even a pagan empire and an orphan queen, for his good purposes. And as we close this study, let's carry this truth with us. God is always, always working, even in the chaos, even in the mess. He writes redemptive stories in the middle of our messes. So if he can use Esther and Mordecai, he can use us too, right where we are. All right, now this list is not an exhaustive list, but let's look at where human free will and God's divine providence meet in the book of Esther. Starting in Esther 1. King Ahasuerus allowed guests to choose how much to drink, revealing how human freedom can escalate into excess. God used the pride and anger of a drunken king to move his plan forward. Queen Vashti, who may have received courage from God to stand against the unjust command, chose to defy King Ahasuerus, while God opened the door for Esther to take the throne. King Ahasuerus chose to listen to advisors and banish Vashti, while God orchestrated a vacancy in the palace. Though Vashti was not executed, her banishment served God's greater purpose. Memucan proposed a decree to preserve male authority, while God used it to advance his redemptive plan. King Ahasuerus attempted to control events, people, and even the sea, as we learned in the historical context, but God was sovereign over hearts and outcomes. In Esther 2, God used King Ahasuerus' defeat in Greece to bring him back to an empty throne. King Ahasuerus accepted his servant's plan to find a new queen, while God was already preparing Esther for that very moment, inside and out. God worked through the death of Esther's parents to bring her into Mordecai's care. Mordecai raised Esther as a daughter, while God prepared him to guide her in divine purpose. Esther was taken into the palace and chose to seek the eunuch's advice, while God granted her favor and wisdom, not only with the eunuchs, but also the other women. Esther's favor with the eunuchs and her companions revealed God's hands in relationships. Esther obeyed Mordecai's advice to hide her heritage, while God positioned her to later reveal it for the exact moments of deliverance. Mordecai went daily to King Ahasuerus' gate to check on Esther, while God wove his concern into his plan. Esther chose humility in her approach, while God shaped her beauty and character for influence. King Ahasuerus crowned Esther as queen, while God was placing her for such a time as this. Mordecai overheard a plot against King Ahasuerus and chose to act, while God preserved King Ahasuerus for future justice. King Ahasuerus promoted Haman instead of Mordecai, while God delayed Mordecai's honor for a better moment. Mordecai refused to bow to Haman, while God used his stand to expose evil plans. Mordecai revealed he was a Jew, while God prepared to highlight his covenant people. Haman restrained his anger temporarily and plotted genocide, while God would turn his plan on his own head. Haman cast lots to determine the Jews' destruction date, while God controlled the outcome and perfectly timed deliverance. King Ahasuerus gave Haman authority to destroy the Jews, while God allowed the evil decree to create space for salvation. The decree was issued at Passover season, linking God's past deliverance to the one to come. Esther 4, Mordecai publicly grieved the decree, while God used his lament to awaken Esther's purpose. Esther's attendants told her of Mordecai's griefs, while God used them as messengers to stir her heart. Mordecai gave Esther a copy of the decree, while God gave Esther clarity and conviction. Esther hesitated to go before King Ahasuerus, but God gave her courage to say, "If I perish, I perish." Mordecai reminded Esther that her position had purpose, while God stirred her to step into it. Mordecai believed that if Esther refused, God would raise another deliverer, showing his faith in divine providence. Esther asked the Jews to fast, while God prepared her for bold action. Esther 5. Esther approached King Ahasuerus without being summoned, while God granted her favor in his eyes. Esther delayed her request and invited King Ahasuerus and Haman to 2 feasts, while God used her timing to expose evil. Haman left the first feast proud, but chose wrath when Mordecai refused to bow, while God prepared Haman's fall. Haman's wife and friends suggested he build gallows, while God would turn the trap back on him. Esther 6. God caused King Ahasuerus to have a sleepless night, and instead of seeking other entertainment, the king asked for the chronicles to be read. King Ahasuerus' servant opened to the exact scroll to the exact account of Mordecai's unrewarded act, while God was ready to honor Mordecai. Haman entered to request Mordecai's death, while God had King Ahasuerus ask how to honor him. Haman described an honor he hoped for himself, while God used his words to elevate Mordecai instead and foreshadowed what was to come. Mordecai accepted King Ahasuerus' honor, while God reversed the roles of oppressor and deliverer, having Haman lead Mordecai around in a parade, again foreshadowing what was to come. Haman ran home humiliated, while God lifted the humble and humbled the proud. Haman's wife and friends, the same who suggested Mordecai's death, claimed Haman would fall before this Jew, while God continued to prove his faithfulness to his people. Esther 7. Esther chose the right moment to reveal Haman's plot, while God gave her the boldness and the words. King Ahasuerus stepped away to cool his anger in the same garden he banished Vashti, while Haman fell at Esther's feet, and God sealed his fate. A eunuch revealed the gallows Haman built, while God turned Haman's own plans on himself. Haman was hanged on the gallows meant for Mordecai, while God displayed perfect justice. Esther 8. King Ahasuerus gave Esther Haman's estate, while God restored what the enemy tried to destroy. Esther pleaded again for her people, while God moved King Ahasuerus to act. King Ahasuerus gave Mordecai authority to write a new decree, while God used it to rescue the Jews. Mordecai wrote a decree allowing the Jews to defend themselves, while God preserved his people. Joy and celebration broke out among the Jews, while the Gentiles turned to God. Esther 9. The Jews chose to stand and defend themselves, while God gave them victory over their enemies. Government officials even supported the Jews, while God turned the hearts of leaders to favor his own people. Esther asked King Ahasuerus for one more day of justice, while God fully removed the threat. Mordecai and Esther instituted Purim, while God ensured future generations would remember his deliverance. The Jews celebrated God's deliverance, while human courage and divine timing worked hand in hand. In Esther 10, King Ahasuerus honored Mordecai, while God raised up the humble to a place of influence. Mordecai used his position to seek the welfare of his people, while God brought peace through his wise leadership.
So I guess they might not have been too upset about the taxes. They could have died.
Might not have been too upset about the taxes.